Welcome everyone to this webinar for Squared Up 3.1. I'm Richard Benwell, founder and product architect here at Squared Up. I've got the pleasure of taking you through all of the new features we have coming out with the 3.1 release. And that is a large list of features that we do need to get through today. It's a great release. It's really exciting to be showing you today. The downside is there's just too much to fit into just sort of a single hour-long webinar that we have today. So what I'm going to do is actually take you on a tour through as many of these features as I can. We'll sort of touch most of these features during the webinar, and then what we'll be doing is following up with some deeper dive webinars over the course of the next few months on most of these topics here. I mean, taking, for example, VADA Linux Discovery. Hopefully we can have a webinar just sort of focusing on that one aspect, or the new WebAPI integration that I'll be showing you later on in this webinar. We'll be doing a deeper dive into that integration too. So sit back, hopefully kind of you'll enjoy what you see here, and then there'll be plenty of opportunity to follow up and look in more detail at all of these great new features. Before I really get stuck into 3.1, I wanted to step back and just look at the challenge that we all are facing in enterprise IT, and the challenge that we're trying to address with Squared Up, and that's the challenge of enterprise application monitoring. And in particular, I want to focus on the enterprise piece of this, so not just application monitoring, but within the enterprise that means monitoring hundreds and hundreds of applications across many different platforms, both Windows, Linux, and of course on-prem, and moving up workloads into the cloud, and that might even be across several different clouds within one organization. And of course, these are not just applications that are the one or two sort of business critical applications maybe that are being sort of currently developed with the DevOps team, sort of kind of active applications from those point of views, but sort of also those legacy applications, you know, all those hundreds of apps. Some may have been deployed months, years ago, some may have knowledge or have documentation associated with them, some may not. So you've got a real challenge in terms of monitoring the infrastructure that make up these applications, but also there's a challenge in delivering that information, that monitoring information to the users who actually need it. It offers no value just to be monitoring and collecting data on these applications and their infrastructure. You really need to deliver that information out to your users for your business to get value out of that monitoring. Now in an enterprise, the users that need that monitoring data are many different types of users across different teams. So with an application, you have the application stakeholders such as the app owner or even the end users themselves, as well as the service desk and other teams involved in delivering that application. But then of course you also have the back-end IT teams, right, the infrastructure teams who are managing the infrastructure that application is hosted on. So many different people needing to see a different aspect of your applications within your business. Typically what happens then across those different teams is you get a sprawl of monitoring tools. So the monitoring tools that the hypervisor team have versus the monitoring tools that the network team have, the server team, storage team, and so on. And traditionally you have that siloed mentality. So the infrastructure is being monitored, but it's not being pieced together into that one single view on your applications. So with this quite sort of complex and challenging landscape, enterprise IT is also under pressure with the sort of competition for delivering applications versus kind of the cloud applications available to businesses today. Internal IT teams are now under pressure to cut costs of their IT, to become more agile like those cloud-based applications, and of course improve the quality of services delivered to the business. So a lot of challenges around really focusing on delivering applications into your business in an efficient way. So with those as the challenges, we think to solve this challenge, enterprise IT needs a tool set that monitors those disparate platforms, so that challenging landscape of many different infrastructure pieces across many different platforms. And that's what we really think SCOM does so well. But where Squared Up comes into the picture is engaging all of those different users with the data you can collect from across all those different platforms. So that's traditionally where we're focused in Squared Up, but of course really on top of that monitoring and engaging those users is unifying everything you do from a point of view of monitoring around a common focus on applications and service delivery. IT has moved on from infrastructure monitoring. Really the focus is now on application monitoring and understanding how your infrastructure monitoring is affecting your applications and obviously affecting your business at the end of the day. So with that in mind, with that challenge in mind, that's why we released Squared Up version 3. the two great new features in SQL version 3 that were released last year. First of all, Total Dashboard Architecture is our innovative new architecture that really delivers a true single pane of glass experience across your monitoring data. That phrase, single pane of glass, is used commonly in the industry. We have focused with SQL v3 on really delivering that for real in an application that you can push out to many different teams and aggregates data across many different platforms. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that today in the release webinar for 3.1. The second great new feature we introduced with SQL version 3 was visual application discovery and analysis, and this really speaks to that unified view around the common focus on applications. And this really is the missing piece of the puzzle. So before you have VADA, it's very, very hard to map out those applications and piece together the infrastructure into that map of your application. Now with VADA, we provide you a way with very, very quickly map your distributed applications and use that information, use the context of applications within your day-to-day infrastructure monitoring. So provide application-centric and application-aware infrastructure monitoring. Now we released SQL version 3 back in September when we attended Ignite in September 2016. Since then there have been 7 maintenance releases, so we've been keeping just sort of the cycle going in terms of the maintenance releases on top of 3.0. But today I'd like to introduce SQL version 3.1. 3 focuses we've had with version 3.1 is really to build on that new platform we introduced with v3. So first of all, the focus was around VADA and really on improving and simplifying the mapping of your distributed applications. So we're focusing on the discovery piece of VADA to allow fast, simple mapping of your DAs. The second piece we wanted to focus on was that single pane of glass experience with Total Dashboard Architecture. And with that, we've introduced new integrations to extend the breadth of platforms that you can integrate Squared Up with and pull data into that single view. And the third one, really a little bit of catch-up in a way. With version 2, we'd built up so many great features on top of the version 2 platform. When we moved over to the version 3 platform, which was a rewrite from the ground up, a brand new platform to run Squared Up on, we didn't have time to migrate everything across from v2, and we really wanted to focus on migrating those features carefully and making sure that they were re-implemented in v3 appropriately. So with 3.1, we hopefully have sort of caught up with the bulk of those features and brought most of those across in mostly a new form. All those features have been reviewed and enhanced in v2 and brought into v3. If you're familiar with v2, hopefully they'll be sort of a pleasant surprise to sort of see them back again. If you're new to Squared Up with version 3, hopefully there's a long list of features there that really improve the overall user experience in Squared Up and exciting new features. So first off then I'm going to cover visual application discovery. So fast, simple mapping of your distributed applications. Let's have a look at the new features available in 3.1 for VADA. First off, it's a small line item, really offers massive new capabilities though, which is Linux discovery support. So now all of your VADA discoveries can span both Windows platform and the Linux platform, and typically you will find an application does at some point span that platform change, and that allows you now to just have a unified view in one VADA discovery across both of those platforms. We have implemented this with a new community management pack for Linux. So that community management pack contains essentially the netstat tasks that VADA depends on, and those have been tested on the Linux distributions that SCOM itself supports, and of course they'll also work on the sort of Unix platforms as well. So with that new community management pack, we now have support for Linux discovery and visual application discovery. We have improved the DNS resolution of external IP addresses. So if you have applications that have external dependencies, so an Azure-based or AWS-based or just a third-party web service that you're not monitoring with SCOM but is a dependency of your application, we now have better DNS lookup, so we can take the IP address that the server's connecting out to, and we actually use another data on demand task to perform that DNS reverse lookup to understand what the domain name of that IP address is. So when you are discovering out your applications, you have a much better idea of those external dependencies that your application requires. In addition to that, in general, we've improved scalability across VADA in two particular areas. One is around looking at large number of processes that actually represent the same application, so a single application, whether it's a database engine or some other sort of infrastructure application, is actually running multiple processes for that application. Now that's sometimes useful to see, but we've decided that we can aggregate those processes up into just a single application to make it much more understandable when you're mapping out your application and understanding the different application dependencies. And in addition to that, we have reviewed a lot of the algorithms within VADA just to make sure that we can scale to more nodes and more connections within the same application diagram. Next up, a very big feature which really moves VADA on from just that sort of automated discovery to more of an assisted discovery, where you can now discover out your servers and now logically group them into application tiers. So you're not just discovering out the network topology of your application, you can now interactively assign and manage your application tiers and move, for example, your web servers into one tier, and of course save that then out into your SCOM distributed application as a component group. So if you're familiar with SCOM DAs and their component groups, we now have full support for that in VADA, so both discovering the network connectivity and topology of your application and then actually sorting out into the logical groupings. Complementing that is an additional feature that allows you to take the automatically discovered topology of your application and manually add any known dependencies to that diagram. So you can let VADA discover out the current topology, so the current connections between your servers, and then manually add in any additional servers and devices that you know are part of your application. So that's the high-level feature list. What I'm going to do now is just drop down into a demo, and we'll take a look at Visual Application Discovery in 3.1. Here's Squared Up 3.1 running. You'll see that it looks and feels the same as 3.0, so no new surprises there. But what I'm going to do is drill down into a web server that's part of our sales application that we're going to map out, and we'll check out how VADA works in 3.1. So here I have the set of perspectives on my web server. I'm just going to switch over to App Discovery. And here we go, VADA kicks off. Now, if you are familiar with VADA in 3.0, you'll see that it does look slightly different. We have these blue squares around your servers that have been discovered with the connector. So these are representing your logical groupings, your application tiers. You can see VADA estimates or kind of has an initial guess at what the kind of groupings are. So for example, it's grouped the initial web server that we found here, and it's grouped the two application servers that are downstream. Just like with 3.0, we have the filtering, so we've filtered out the SCOM agents and other processes that are running on this box that aren't relevant to our application mapping. And we have that very, very simple diagram showing the web server connected to two back-end application servers. So let's just name these groups. So I'm going to call this my IIS web tier and this my IIS app tier. So I now have a very clear picture of the two tiers within my application. Let's continue mapping out these two servers. And we'll find that those then have three dependencies sort of further downstream. Now this is where it gets more interesting with sorting out your application tiers and your logical groups. So we have our web tier connecting through to our app tier, connecting through to these downstream dependencies. Now, first example here is looking at the DNS resolution. So we actually have IIS connecting out on port 80 to some IP address which we're not monitoring with SCOM, and actually what we've done is resolved that to a Google address. So this is actually a web service hosting up on Google's cloud, so we don't have any monitoring of that. It's a third-party web service. So what I'm going to do is just grab that and drag that down into its own component group, and I'm going to give that component group a name. So let's just call this an external web service. I've also now got my other two servers here. Now I can see by the name that one is a SQL server and one actually is an Oracle server. I'm just going to drag my SQL server down here and split that out into a logical group as well. So now I've got a clearer idea. I'm just going to give these names and then we can see this is actually our CRM DB, so our sales app is connecting to that, and our ERP DB there as well. So not an untypical application, the web tier, the application tier, and actually it's depending on both a Windows SQL-based database and an Oracle-based database, as well as an external web service. Let's continue with the discovery here. So I'm just going to discover out the SQL server. And we should find that actually it's discovered the other server in the SQL cluster. I'm not actually interested in this process, so I'm just going to filter that out. And of course we can see also unusually sort of Windows Update running, so I'm not interested in that from my application point of view, so let's just filter that out as well. Ooh. All right. What you can see in action as well is a new auto fit mode in VADA. So just down the bottom right there, there's that toggle here for fit. What this is doing is allowing me to discover out new nodes, and as I'm changing the diagram, it's automatically zooming to make sure it fits in the page. So a really useful new feature just to allow you to span out to very large applications and keep them all in one view as you go. So I've discovered out the mirrored SQL Server. Let's look at another new feature in 3.1, which is support for discovery on Linux servers. So what I've done so far is just discovered out a set of Windows servers using just the netstack command on Windows via the community data on demand management pack for Windows. Having installed the data on demand pack for Linux, I can now run essentially netstat against that Linux box, and we have insight into the actual processes within that box, and we can see we have IIS connecting here out to our Oracle instance, our Oracle DB test instance. I can also, let's just unfilter this process, which is part of the SCOM agent on that box, and expand out just to sort of show you that we are actually running then the discovery against that Linux box. So we want to discover sort of downstream dependencies or upstream dependencies of that Linux box. We now have those capabilities fully within VADA 3.1. Let's filter that back out. All right, so that's covered up a new set of features in VADA so far. You can kind of see that the application is taking shape now, so you can focus on just the blue outline, the logical outline of this application, as well as seeing kind of the detailed network links that really we're sort of mapping on top of. So we've just sort of covered that Linux discovery. One kind of new feature here is the aggregation of different processes. So if you have used VADA in the past on applications within your environment, you may have seen a view a lot more like this, which is actually seeing each individual process. So for example, this Oracle server is running 11 different processes to serve up the clients. And actually, obviously, you can see it confuses the diagram. We have a lot more data on the diagram, but it's not actually necessarily offering much more understanding of the application. So VADA in 3.1 now aggregates all those processes together just in the top level process and shows you the number of instances. And in general, we expect that to be collapsed. Obviously, it can be useful in troubleshooting purposes to sort of drill down into individual processes, but generally now we've managed to give you a very kind of clean, understandable view of this application, which when we're mapping it out is the important bit. So we've covered a few different features there now with the aggregation as well. What I want to do is just sort of continue to map out this application, and I want to sort of map it out upstream. So I'm just going to expand out those two upstream links, and we can see hopefully they resolve to our other web servers that are part of the web tier. Let's drag those in so we can move nodes around the different groups. Let's just move WebO3 in as well. So VADA initially puts those newly discovered upstream dependencies into a new group and lets you sort of just define the fact that they're in the same web tier there. just drag that in again. So that's great, and then I'm just going to discover out these, and I should find, again, we've sort of got another upstream component here which is monitored by SCOM. So we've got a NetScaler load balancer connecting in. So I'm just going to give that a name, and actually we've nearly finished our application map. But as you can see, just in a few minutes sort of mapped out this application end to end. Now, this is all based on the current network connectivity of the different servers involved in this application. If I know that the application does actually have a dependency that perhaps only when a server starts up it connects to another server and pulls some information in, or sort of something that's kind of less frequent, and hence I can't capture it by running netstat, I can add that in manually. So what I'm going to do here is just click the plus button on the app tier, and I can search now for any server or device in SCOM. We don't have the ability at the moment in VADA to add on arbitrary SCOM objects, and in particular kind of components that are contained within a server. So I can't add in databases and other sort of kind of component level objects right now. We're limiting it just to adding in servers and devices. So I'm adding in my CMDB server. This is actually a Linux server into the app tier. That should appear, and then I can drag that out into its own separate group here. So what you end up having, as well as the sort of assisted discovery using the network connections, we're also able to manually modify and edit this diagram. So a lot closer to the distributed application designer in SCOM. So you can kind of now create those groups, name them, and create the connections between them. So if I want to just create a connection to this group here, very, very simple to do. So a really nice, simple, interactive application mapping tool that hopefully you can push out, beyond just the sort of SCOM experts now, beyond the SCOM administrators, to your application teams who really need this functionality themselves, so they can actually map out the application that they're familiar with. So there we have a pretty complex application, number of different tiers, different groups. As I say, we've just done this across the last few minutes is mapping out this application. We can now save that application. Let me just save this off as a dashboard. And we now get a very nice visual dashboard for this, which we can switch into a view mode. With the view mode in 3.1 now includes the health state as well. So if we want to publish that out as a just a nice high-level overview of the application health end-to-end, from the load balancer all the way through to both the Oracle and the SQL database, we've got a really nice looking dashboard there that really clearly shows the logical structure of this application, not just the sort of network topology of this structure. As in 3.0, we also have the magic analyze button, so switch over to analyze. This is where the nice auto-fit functionality works well, which is as data is loaded in and we get a more complex and richer view of the performance of this application end-to-end, VADA zooms out and makes sure we have that all on the dashboard as well. So again, you can publish this dashboard out as a more informative dashboard showing end-to-end performance of your application, allowing you to really pinpoint problems. So some great new features in 3.1 with VADA, as I say, really kind of taking forward the discovery side of VADA and allowing you to very, very easily map out your applications. If I save this into SCOM, so something with not necessarily changed in 3.1, but it offers a lot more value now in 3.1. If I save this out as a distributed application back into SCOM, the tiers and the groups that I've created get saved along with that distributed application with all of the appropriate health roll-ups. So this DA will have these servers containing these component groups with all the appropriate roll-ups in your SCOM distributed application. So very, very much aligned now with your SCOM distributed applications. All right, so that's an overview of the new VADA features in 3.1. Let's just drop back to the slides. And I want to now move on to the other area of focus with 3.1, which is with total dashboard architecture. As I explained in the intro, really what we wanted to do in 3.1 is capitalize on the sort of new platform we've built, the new architecture we've built, and really extend this concept of a single pane of glass on top of your monitoring data, and really extend that beyond just your SCOM data to other platforms and tools you have within your IT organization. So just to kind of recap on what we have and sort of what we've introduced with 3.1. First of all, I wanted just to recap on the OMS integration that we've had with 3.0. In 3.1, we have just made some minor improvements to this to include the new scalar display. So if you want to pull back a total or a summary, a number of items from OMS, you can pull that into a tile on your dashboards, just showing that sort of large number rather than tabular data. So great sort of powerful integration with OMS, and I'll touch on that in the demo that I'm about to give. But where we've made more changes is with the SQL integration in 3.1. So we had the SQL tile in 3.0. In 3.1, again, we've added that new scalar display, but really, really importantly, we've added support for contextual queries. So you can use the SQL tile within a perspective, so within the context of a SCOM object, and actually pull SQL data in from a SQL database in the context of that SCOM object. And really that takes the sort of possibilities of this beyond just the single pane of glass and the integration at a very top level dashboard, but now we can pull together that data and perform that integration at every layer, at every level of the product. So for every server, for every application, you can now contextually perform SQL queries and pull data in that's relevant to that server or application. Now the great example here is System Center Service Manager. So if you do have Service Manager installed and you're using that as your CMDB and service management tool, you can now pull data in from your CMDB and service management tool directly into Squared Up alongside all of your SCOM data. I'll show you that in a second as a demo. That is just one example of the SQL integration. If you have any other tool that you might want to pull data in alongside your SCOM data, you can do that with the SQL tile and the contextual query support. In addition to those two changes, with 3.1 we've introduced brand new integration that we're calling WebAPI Integration. Essentially it supports any RESTful web API. So modern cloud-based applications have APIs like this, as well as many on-prem applications too. So essentially it's an HTTP API that you can pull data from. We have, again, tabular and scalar displays on top of that data, and this really, really important contextual query support, and I'll show you that in a second. A great demonstration, a great example of the use of the WebAPI integration is with an application like ServiceNow. So if you aren't using Service Manager, instead using ServiceNow or another cloud-based platform, they will have that RESTful API containing all your CMDB data or your service desk data, and again you can pull that data straight into your Squared Up dashboards and perspectives at every level of the product. So let's take a look at those three in a demo. So I'm just going to switch over again to my demo lab. And what I'm going to do is actually just pop up first of all to a top level dashboard here. So we put this dashboard together with the SQL tile. Now this is actually possible with 3.0 today. So this is the SQL tile performing some queries against Service Manager. So overall instance reported 52, changes raised 4, and here are the open incidents. If I just briefly click on the editor here, very simple to do. You just provide the connection string of your Service Manager database and your query. Okay, so we know there's the data in the database. We want to put it into a dashboard so the user doesn't have to navigate away to another dashboarding product or sort of another overview of their service desk. Very, very easy to do. But I wanted to compare that now with what we have in 3.1, which is the integration with perspectives as well. So being able to perform contextual SQL integration to pull SQL data in from Service Manager at every level of the product. So I just come back to my application diagram. What I'm going to do is drill down into one of these servers. Let's just switch it into view mode. So I'm going to drill down into APO1. And as before, we have the set of perspectives available for this server. So it's a web server, so we get the IIS perspective here. It's also a Windows server, so we get that perspective and so on. So all of these are already providing very kind of rich data in the context of APO1, so a really different view on top of your SCOM data. But what we see here is we have a set of additional perspectives. The first one I'm going to just sort of cover briefly is OMS. So again, this is existing functionality that we've had in 3.0, where we are putting in OMS data, but in the context of APO1. So it's not a top-level dashboard. It's not just putting global data in from OMS. It's saying, given this particular server, what can you tell me about it, and pull that data in from OMS. In this case, very, very sort of powerful feature is in one click seeing all of the recent configuration changes on this server. Another example here, we don't have any coming up over the last 12 hours, but our recent logons onto this server. So OMS is auditing all of the changes and all of the logons across all of your servers, and we can pull that data in just for one server and show that alongside all of the other SCOM data we have for the server. So that's an example of the integration with OMS. Now with the contextual query support with the SQL Tile, we can do the same with Service Manager. So one click away, switching from the SCOM data over there for the IIS components and the Windows components, switch over to our Service Desk or ITSM view here, which is integrating with Service Manager, and in an instant we have both the CMDB data, so looking at the OU servers in, the server owner, its deployment status and so on. We can also see any incidents that have been opened and referencing this application. So we have an incident here, you know, that is referencing, sorry, this server. So we have sort of relevant information that we may need to be aware of when servicing this server. We also see open change requests against this server. So no need to switch over to another tool, perhaps a server owner that's just generally not engaged with Service Manager, doesn't use it day to day, now has instant access to that data in the single pane of glass. We also see here just at the bottom, this is not actually specific to Service Manager, we've added in just the understanding of the application context for this server. So APO1 has both the CMDB data, it has these open incidents, change requests, and actually it's part of this sales application. So piecing together all of that information you have across your infrastructure monitoring, your application models, and your service management tool all into one single pane of glass. What I wanted to do just briefly, I'm not going to go into a sort of full explanation of how you perform this integration, but I want to just again open up the dashboard editor and dip into one of these tiles and just show you roughly what I mean by those contextual queries and how it's working. So if I come down here to open incidents, for example, if I just open up this tile, you'll see here we have the connection string into the Service Manager database as we expect, and the query. Now the query looks very similar, but we're not wanting to pull global data out of Service Manager. We have to dynamically pull data out about this one server. And of course, no matter what server we click on, we want to pull data out of Service Manager for that particular server. So we've parameterized the query here using properties of the SCOM object. So this query here actually, if I just zoom in a little bit, is asking Service Manager for information about this particular server, so where the ID matches the SCOM ID. Now with Service Manager, it has the same IDs as SCOM has for the different servers, so it's very, very easy to do. Essentially, we're asking Service Manager for information about this particular ID. We can do the same thing, but with different properties. We're just showing an example here. If I open up this query, if, for example, we can't pull data in from Service Manager or some other database using the SCOM IDs because that other database doesn't have those SCOM IDs in, we can always match across other properties as well. So here we're actually querying the Service Manager database based on this server name. The editor, if I just delete that properties name there, I can construct the SQL query and at any point inject any data from my SCOM object. So for example, if I wanted to instead match on the organizational unit or for example the AD SID, so if my external tool knows about these servers but from its Active Directory ID, I can use that in my query as well. So parameterizes these SQL queries, dynamically then constructs that query based on the context and pulls the relevant data in. So a really, really powerful way now of dynamically constructing views on top of your objects based on your SCOM data. So that's the Service Manager integration. If I just come back out of that now and discard those changes. What I want to do is now show you the same result, i.e. pulling in your CMDB and your service management data in alongside your SCOM data, but on top of ServiceNow instead. I'm just going to come back up to the application diagram and just drill down into a different server that we have some more information for. So I'm going to drill down into my web tier here. So let's drill down into Web01. So the Web01, very similar, it's an IS web service, we get the same perspectives. If I now switch over to the ServiceNow perspective, so we've deliberately made this look very similar to the Service Manager perspective, just so you can see you can end up with the same results despite this sitting on top of a very, very different platform in the sense that it's a cloud-based platform with a RESTful web API rather than an on-prem platform with a SQL database. So very, very similar results. We've got the CMDB, so the asset data here showing the owner of the server. We have the open incidents and change requests as well. So just within a click, we now have our ServiceNow data pulled dynamically down from the ServiceNow database into the squared up UI. If I just open up the editor and give you a very sort of brief look at how we're doing this, again we'll sort of cover this in much more depth in a dedicated webinar later on this year. But if I just, for example, open up asset properties here, we can see here that we have a different type of configuration because this is for the web API configuration. We can set up a number of different sort of connections. So this is our ServiceNow connection, our ServiceNow provider. So this tile is connecting to ServiceNow, as are all of these tiles. And this is the really interesting bit here, which is our HTTP settings. So we're essentially performing a request via the ServiceNow REST API, and they're constructed sort of similarly to a web URL. So we have our root URL plus then the name of the table we want to perform a lookup on, and then some parameters to try and filter the data. Now at this point you'd expect the computer name to appear in the URL for that web API query, and you can see again we've parameterized it. So we're dynamically replacing this with the name of the computer that we're looking at, so Web01. So that allows us now to query the ServiceNow data and pull that down into our dashboards. The result is we see the asset properties come in. So we can perform these queries against ServiceNow, let's say any database or any API that contains information that we might want to pull in context, but we could pull data in based on this server's name or the server owner or any other property that SCOM has. So we'll cover that off in more webinars, but hopefully that's given you a really good idea of now how we can broaden our squared up interface to cover not just our SCOM data, but we've now got OMS data coming in, Service Manager data or ServiceNow data, and many more platforms to come. Okay, so that covers off just some of those integrations. If I just finish looking at that by coming back up to our sales application, so I'm just going to search for this. Sales apps, this is the sales app we modeled earlier. Just a very brief look at a very similar idea there. So I've just been showing you integration at the server level, so that's kind of very easy to sort of conceptually understand that we're looking at a server and looking at the CMDB data open for that server. But having modeled out that application, we can now do much more application sort of centric monitoring and sort of operations processes. So here we have our sales app, we have the topology, and what we've done is very similarly added in these same perspectives. So for this whole application, tell me what's changed, tell me what servers have changed when, and who's logged on to what servers. So now we're doing application level diagnostics and monitoring. We can do the same with Service Manager. Tell me now about the owner of this service, and not just the servers, but who's the owner of the service, who's the organization, what's the organizational unit that owns this application, and so on, who's the application owner, and what are the open incidents and changes against this service, and just a very similar view with ServiceNow, putting it in at an application level, not just at a server level. And that really applies to anything you can view in Squared Up. You can now pull data in from external data sources to supplement that SCOM data. All right, so that covers off the total dashboard architecture changes and the new integrations. The last topic I'll run through before handing over to my colleague Richard South is looking at the features that we've migrated across from V2. So as I say, each of these features we've reviewed in V2 and actually migrated over, generally with sort of enhancements and improvements to kind of make them even better in the V3 platform. As I say, hopefully if you've been on V2 in the past, these have become a sort of pleasant surprise, some sort of familiar faces, and you're pleased to see the features back looking better than ever. If you're new to Squared Up with version 3, then these are some great new features that make Squared Up a much more powerful tool. The first one has been very, very popular on our sort of support and asking for implementation in V3 is role-based navigation bars. So the ability to publish out different dashboards to different users based on their role. We now have a new UI for managing that, and I'll show you that in the demo. The next one up is just some simplification of the dashboard authoring workflows, and I'll cover that off in the demo as well. So very easy to publish changes to dashboards or discard changes to dashboards instead of publishing them. We have a sort of new set of features that combine together to effectively give you scoped dashboards in V3. So if you're familiar with the page level scope feature in V2, this really is offering you the equivalent functionality in V3. So allowing you to take a dashboard, define a dashboard level scope, and that gives lots of advantages like being able to see the health state of that overall scope and having maintenance mode and various other things. So I'll cover that off in the demo as well. We have reintroduced grouping and sorting in the status tile, which can be essential for some health state and some status sections in your dashboards. We have also reintroduced custom labeling. So it's an experimental feature in V2. We've now fully incorporated into version 3, giving you the ability to fully customize the labels in the status tile and other tiles such as the SLA tile and even the performance tile to make sure that the information you're showing your users makes sense and you're not just relying on the SCOM display names when showing data to your users. We have made many new improvements to the performance graphing features in Squared Up version 3, including the ability to compare performance metrics, to interactively mouse over and drill down into performance charts. And also just sort of some minor features, but some that sort of are very, very useful if you rely on them, which is when you're managing alerts within dashboards, there's the option to assign alerts to the current user as you change their resolution state, and also warning users about closing monitors that have been raised by alerts. Just a quick note before I go on to the demo. Not all features have been migrated over from V2. We really did have a very kind of broad feature set in V2. There are still some pending migration which we're looking at very closely and just working out again how best to migrate them over to V3 and fit them into the V3 platform. With the release of 3.1 there will be a KB article just listing out each of those sort of features and the plans for them. All right, so let's switch over to our demo lab again and just run through all of those new features that have been added to V3 with their sort of kind of V2 origins. So first up, let's have a look at role-based navigation bars. Very, very kind of popular feature in enterprise use of Squared Up, where you're pushing this out to different teams. You really want to give them those customized views and make sure they get to the data that they need to do their job. So what we've done in version 3 is actually incorporate this now into our settings UI. So we've come over to settings here and switch across to profiles. This is where we can now manage the different user groups who are logging on to Squared Up and their navigation bars, and in addition their permissions. So by default everyone gets the default profile, so they get a default navigation bar and they don't have any specific permissions unlike the administrators. So what I can now do is just click add, and I'm going to type in the name of an Active Directory group. for my DBAs. So I want to provide a profile for my DBAs so that when they log on to Squared Up, they just get the set of dashboards they need. So click Add. I now get that new profile, and I can now edit the navigation bar for these users. So my DBAs, I'm just going to give some examples here. What I'm going to do is just add in a SQL folder, and then under that I'm just going to pop in a couple of the SQL dashboards. Let's look at the 2014 performance dashboard and the 2012 performance dashboard. So just as an example, building out the set of dashboards that my DBAs might need. I'm also just going to add in a SCOM dashboard just because I need that for the next part of the demo. So there we go. We built out just a very sort of simple navigation bar for our SQL DBAs. In addition, I can give them specific permissions. This is something else that a lot of customers were asking for, and really something we wanted to see with Squared Up is kind of use of the dashboards and the dashboard authoring, dashboard design outside of the sort of Squared Up administrator and the SCOM administrators. So really the vision with Squared Up is to be able to sort of push this out to your different teams, give them Squared Up as a self-service tool where they can create the dashboards they need on top of your SCOM monitoring data. So with one click, I can enable my DBAs to now create their own dashboards and perspectives if I want to. We have separated out some advanced authoring permissions. So for example, I don't want to give my DBAs the ability to perform arbitrary queries against my SQL and my WebAPI providers, for example. So I'm not actually allowing them to do the integrations, and also I'm not allowing them the administrative privileges down the bottom here. But that should be enough to get them going so they can log on, they should see these dashboards, and they can also edit their own dashboards. If I now just switch over to Chrome and I'll log on to a DBA, what you will see, or actually I'll just make this a little bit more obvious, if I switch over to the Everyone profile, I'm actually going to delete out some of these. I'm going to delete out my applications as well. So by default, everyone just gets the welcome and the overview. A SQL DBA should get the welcome and the overview. In addition, they should get the SQL and the SCOM dashboard here. And the profiles are additive. So if a user is part of the SQL DBAs group, but is also part of, for example, an Oracle group as well, then they would get to see kind of both of those sets of dashboards based on their profile membership. So having edited that, I'm just going to switch over to another browser and log on as a different user. So I'm going to log on now as a DBA. So this DBA is part of that OpDBA group that I added the profile for. So what that should mean is a couple of things now. First of all is I get to see the SQL-specific dashboards at the top. Let's just wait for it to load on for the first time. There you go, just warming up for me. So you can see here I have the welcome dashboard, the overview dashboard, and I have my SQL dashboards. So only members of this profile will get those additional dashboards. In addition, you can see I have dashboard authoring permissions. So I'm not a SCOM administrator, I'm not a Squared Up administrator. I can now go create my own dashboards. Now, if you've also combined this with SCOM role-based access control, I should be able to click plus here and start creating dashboards on top of just the SCOM objects that I have permissions to view. So if you have reduced the scope of your users using role-based access control in SCOM, then if I, for example, start adding in status sections to my dashboards, I should only be able to add in the servers, for example, and the groups that I have access to as a DBA within SCOM. So that's a very, very simple way now of managing your users and their profiles and their permissions. What I want to do next is a slightly more kind of tricky concept, and that's around the scoping of dashboards. So if you are familiar with the page level scope in V2, this is now how it's going to work in version 3. So I have actually what I'm going to do is just take the SQL dashboard, sorry, so I'm going to take my SQL 2012 performance dashboard. So I'm going to take this dashboard. Now, drilling down to this dashboard, this is what we call a standalone dashboard. So it is just a dashboard that's been created by clicking that plus button there. Each tile has been scoped to the SCOM 2012 computers group, and we've added in some performance data. So it's great as a standalone dashboard, but it has a few drawbacks. One is I don't see the health of the overall SCOM 2012 computers group, so it's not like I have a roll-up health for this group on the dashboard. I don't have, for example, access to maintenance mode and other tasks that I might be able to perform against this group. And if I do edit this dashboard, I have to manually add each tile and scope it to the same SQL 2012 computers group. So if you are building a dashboard that really is targeted at a specific group or application, it's actually much better now to convert that into a perspective dashboard against that group or application. So what I'm going to do here is just click the edit button. I'm just going to click this convert to perspective button, and it asks me, okay, you want to convert this to a perspective. What is this perspective on? And actually this is a perspective on the SQL 2012 computers group. So SQL 2012 computers. So what I want to tell Squared Up is use this dashboard not just as a standalone floating dashboard, but as a dashboard on top of my SQL Server 2012 computers group. I click convert, and what it's going to do now is take me to the drill down for that computer group and show me my dashboard now acting as a perspective on that group. So I now have the health state for the whole computer group. I have maintenance mode for that computer group, tasks and so on. Now when I add tiles into this dashboard, they'll automatically be scoped to the SQL Server 2012 computers group. In addition, because now it's a perspective, I have the other perspectives on this group alongside this performance perspective. So yes, I'm interested in my SQL 2012 performance, but I'm also obviously interested in the group members. I'm also interested in the alerts across these SQL servers. And look, here's my OMS change tracking perspective appearing even at a group level. So as a DBA now, I have full auditing of all of the changes that apply to my SQL servers and anyone who's logging directly on to these SQL servers. It's that pesky Ashley again logging onto my SQL servers and sort of probably changing some of those settings without going through the formal change control. So that's the advantage really of converting this dashboard into a perspective. It really, from a user experience, you get that context of sort of where you are and what you're looking at and being able to switch between kind of different views on your same infrastructure. So here's my my perspective. One last thing to sort of make this act like a dashboard like it did before. I want to publish this into the navigation bar. So I can click publish here. Add perspective to navigation bar. So perspectives now really are first-class dashboards from the point of view of being able to publish them into the navigation bar. You don't have to just put dashboards into the navigation bar and have perspectives on the drill down. They are really sort of one and the same thing from the point of view of the navigation bar. So I can hit publish now, and I've now created or converted that standalone dashboard into something that is a perspective on top of the SQL Server 2012 computers group. It's in my navigation bar. I can switch now between those different perspectives, maintenance mode, health state, and so on. One last thing, if I really wanted to sort of publish this out as just the dashboard for this group, I wasn't really interested in the other perspectives, I can also switch that into the dashboard mode, which I can't see the button for, so I'll kind of come back to that another time. But you can also switch that into dashboard mode so that the perspective ribbon here disappears and it really is a full page dashboard like you started with. So that's, if you're familiar with page level scope in V2, that's the equivalent now in V3. If you're new to Squared Up with V3, well, I encourage you to start maybe by building dashboards, but really look to convert those into perspectives as soon as you can, in order to kind of get the advantages that perspectives bring. All right, so we've created the perspectives now. What I want to do is switch over to the SCOM Advanced Overview and use this just to cover off some of the improvements we've made just at a dashboarding level with some of the tiles, again migrating over features from V2. I'm actually going to discard these changes. Let's let's go with this. So we have our alerts on the right-hand side. Just a couple of changes there. If I click on an alert that's been raised by a monitor, let's see if I can find one here. So first of all, if I click on an alert that's been raised by a monitor, we give your users the warning. So we probably all know users shouldn't be closing monitor-based alerts, right? They close themselves when the monitor detects that the state is now healthy. So we put that warning up for any alerts that are monitor alerts, and we also have this sort of one-click assign alerts to me. So if I want to acknowledge and assign that alert to me, click update, it's in one click. I've both acknowledged that alert and assigned it to myself. So really making the most out of the assigned user field in SCOM alerts. On the left-hand side here, a few changes. You have to forgive me, I do have some changes left over from the previous webinar, but we have the infrastructure node here. Let's just refresh. So the infrastructure status tile on the left-hand side here is using the new sorting in the status tile. So by default you get just that list of objects sorted by their name, but I can do now is sort by, for example, their health state and make the reds appear at the top, or I can group by those as well, make that more explicit. So you have very, very easy visual access to the issues in your environment. So that's sorting by health state and grouping by health state. And then down the bottom here we've used custom labeling to actually provide a more informative view on the service that is being monitored here. Now by default, if we come back to the sort of V2 default, we just see the display name of the object appearing, which in many cases is what you need. In many cases, if it's a hosted object, this is obviously not telling us much information about which of these services is which. We can add in the path very easily, so now we see actually there's one service on SCOM1, one service on SCOM2, or we can even customize our own name. And you can see here we have the same editor, very similar to what's used with the SQL tile and the WebAPI tile. And let me just zero this out and start again. So one example is I don't really need to see the name of the service. I know that's the config service, so in this case I might just be interested in the path, right? That will tell me enough. It's the config service on SCOM1 or SCOM2, but I can go on to use any of those advanced properties on the SCOM object. So for example, if I want to be reminded of the actual name of the service, so CS host, I can put that in brackets after the path. So this is CS host on SCOM1 and CS host on SCOM2. So you're free to now customize any of those labels using any of the properties of that object, including the advanced properties, the extended properties the SCOM gives you. Another use of that is on our performance tile over here. So you can see that I have added in a key to our graph. So without the key, that's fine. You can mouse over and interact with this, but if this is published out as a wall monitor dashboard, you obviously want to know which line is which. So adding the key in allows you to see that. And again, we can use just the built-in label templates, or we can actually customize our own labels. So in this case, I want to just show the instance for the performance counter. That's enough information for this dashboard. So I've simplified that down for my users and customized the labels that are shown on the graph there. So that's just some few enhancements we've made to V3 based on some of the features we'd previously sort of accumulated in V2. The last area, just before I kind of wrap up, is looking at the performance graphing in version 3, which is looking really, really great. So let me just switch over to SQL 2014 Performance Dashboard. So first off, we've tweaked the colors a little bit, just to make each line sort of visually distinct as it can be. And we've got a great new mouse over, so interactive graphs now. If I can just pick out any point on any one of these graphs, I can quickly see that's a peak at 9:17 in the morning on Tuesday, January 31st, and it was on SQL 04. So very, very easy now just to interact with the graphs on the dashboard and pick out these points. I can also drill down, so let me drill down into this metric here. Now the drill down is consistent now with your dashboard tiles. We get the same interactivity, so the same mouse over, very easy to see these peaks, obviously changing time frame. Now kind of interesting here, I can see there was a peak at 1 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday, 1 o'clock in the morning on Monday, Saturday, Friday, and so on. So very, very easy to kind of pick out the data you have in front of you. It's also useful to be able to drill down. So if I want to drill down in particular time, I can drill down from 12 o'clock noon on the Sunday and then to, let's say, 11 o'clock on that Tuesday. So drill down to that particular period. So much better sort of interactivity for your users when they're exploring the performance data. I can also very easily now add on additional objects to this chart. So I'm looking at SQL 04. I can see the peaks that are happening at 1 o'clock in the morning. What I want to do is now just sort of pull in SQL 03. I have the standard sort of picker for objects. So I can use a list. I can pick out a whole group of servers to compare with, or I could even pick out, you know, a sort of custom filter for my SCOM objects. But most people are going to be just comparing this with another server that they're interested in. So here's SQL 03, pull that in, and we have them side by side. Enhanced from V2, we now have these metrics are shown in a summary for each of the lines on the graph. This will show up to 3 different summaries before sort of collapsing down into a more compact view, but very easy just to compare averages across 2 objects and so on. And lastly, just sort of round out the functionality, I can click export like we had in 3.0, and as you'd expect, the SQL 04 object that we started with, but also the SQL 03 object that we added in, is exported into Excel. That's just loading on my other monitor here. Let's pull that up. So you get all of the performance comparisons being exported into Excel as well. So just even those sort of minor changes, really just improving the experience across the board, both from just the top level dashboards and the dashboard interactivity down through into the performance reporting, and some really kind of great features to have back in the V3 platform. All right, with that, I'm going to wrap up on the demos. Thanks very much for listening to those. I'm going to hand over to Richard South, my colleague, who's going to just take you through some of the licensing and upgrade considerations for 3.1 and finishing off with a look ahead at 2017 for Squared Up.
That's great, Richard. Many thanks indeed for that. There's some awesome new features, and thank you too to everybody that we've been conversing with on the chat. It's great to hear all of your excitement and the feedback. That's terrific, and some really good kind of points and questions raised. Hopefully myself or my colleagues have done a pretty good job of answering those off for you. I just wanted to walk you through a bit of licensing and upgrade guidance. So firstly, if you're currently on version 3.0 in production, great. That's the most simple scenario, and it's a nice, simple, in-place upgrade to version 3.1 with no licensing kind of complications. If you're currently testing version 3.0, we anticipate that you'll want to sort of extend that testing onto the new v3.1. So what we've done is we've extended your special v3 test license to the end of February in order to allow you to sort of finish off that testing on v3.1. For that change to take effect, you'll simply need to reapply your existing special extended license key that we've provided with you and reactivate it. And as I say, that will then be extended until 28th of February. So you'll be able to upgrade that in place to 3.1 as well. If you're still entirely on V2 and you haven't got started with V3 yet, maybe this is the first time you've dropped in on us since version 3 was released, it's important for me to sort of stress at this stage that there is no in-place upgrade from V2 to V3, so you do need to build a clean installation. We of course have migration tools to assist you. To also assist that migration, we'll provide you with a special 45-day license to test v3.1, and that special license includes all features and unlimited users. For more details on that, if you are kind of coming to this totally new to V3, we've got a comprehensive FAQs document available at download.squaredup.com/v3. V3 FAQs. So have a good read of that and drop us a line if you've got any questions. One point to make, which I didn't put on the slide here, is that the WebAPI Tile is only available to customers with our Enterprise Application Monitoring Edition. So if you've got VADA, you'll get the WebAPI integration as well, but that doesn't come with the Enterprise Starter Pack or Community Edition license. One obvious question that all of you have been asking through chat is when and where do I get version 3.1? The release is to follow very shortly, so you should expect to receive an email from us tomorrow. That email will contain download details. It should also contain a link to the recording of this webinar and the slides if you want those as well. So look out for an email from us tomorrow, and as with everything, we'll also put that out via our blog, Twitter, and LinkedIn and so on. Whilst we sort of had you here, Richard and I just also wanted to sort of share a little taste of kind of what 2017 holds in store and what you should expect to sort of see for us. Turn of the year, a major new release coming out, but the theme for 2017 for us as a business is really what we're calling squared up in action. We've sort of spent a huge amount of effort over the last 18 months or so in developing the sort of squared up platform, a huge re-architecture of the platform, major new features, and as you've sort of started hopefully to get a real taste of from today's webinar, huge kind of integration possibilities with a wide array of platform. We now want to sort of spend 2017 focusing on helping customers really kind of make the most of that and really hitting your goals for kind of monitoring and operations. So you should expect to see regular maintenance releases from us. We run 2 weekly sprints here at Squared Up. We don't release with every sprint, but that gives you an idea of the basis on which we're working. And we also aim to release kind of feature releases on a quarterly basis. What you should expect to see from my end of the business in particular is a new webcast series, so taking the type of subjects that we've covered today, but really going in depth with you on them. A lot more detailed blogs, video tutorials, and integration sort of showcases. With regards to ServiceNow, which has also got a lot of you talking to us on chat, I can tell you that there's sort of further integration to come, and drop us a line if you'd like to work with us on that. Part of the theme of 2017 is working a lot more closely with customers, really so we can help you reach your goals, but more importantly so we can take that learning kind of back inside the business, put that into the product, and help more and more kind of customers achieve what they're after. We've already started working with a number of our kind of closest customers on what we call kind of customer solution development, working towards case studies, references, and showcases. So if those two aspects, both kind of working in close conjunction with us and being able to sort of reference that publicly, is of interest to you, drop us a line at hello@squaredup.com. But as you'll know, we work very closely and work hard to sort of nurture our Squared Up community. Things like the SQL Tile, the WebAPI integration have huge sort of possibilities, but at Squared Up we're not going to be kind of directly covering all of those ourselves. For example, integration with BMC Remedy came up as a question in the chat window. Well, yes, that is a sort of possibility. We'd be very happy to work with you on that, but for example, we don't have BMC Remedy in here, so there's a limit to how much we can do in that respect. So we are looking to work in close collaboration with our customers on that front. That's a little flavour of the year ahead, so lots to come. And next stop for us is the Nordic Infrastructure Conference in Oslo later this week. So if you're in town, drop by and say hi to us. It'd be great to meet you in person. I and Richard are just going to take a quick look at the questions that came through, make sure that we haven't left anything unanswered, and after that we'll wrap. So just bear with me one moment while we check through those questions. Okay, well I think between us we've got everything. It just remains for me to say many thanks again for joining us. If you enjoyed the webinar, drop us a line in the chat window. It means a lot to us. If there are any questions left unanswered or more things you want to know, you can always reach us at hello@squaredup.com or support@squaredup.com. Thank you very much for listening, everybody.